Have you ever watched someone be treated like they didn't matter, right there in front of you while everyone else just looked away? What if the person being humiliated wasn't just a nobody, but someone who once stood on the front lines for your freedom? What if the badge meant to protect became the thing that endangered? And what would you do if a single phone call could change everything? This isn't just a story about a homeless man and two cruel police officers. This is about what happens when power meets silence, and silence finally decides to speak. About a quiet town hiding loud injustices and one woman, one soldier, and one unshakable truth. That turned everything upside down. Stay with us because by the end of this story, you might never look at a uniform or a stranger on the street the same way again. Snow was falling in soft, hushed waves across the quiet town of Riverbrook. Storefronts glowed faintly through the frost and the streets were mostly empty, except for one figure walking slowly past shuttered windows. His name was Eli Turner. His boots were cracked. His coat, a worn military jacket, hung heavy on his shoulders, a faded U.S. flag still clinging to one sleeve. And though most people that night would have crossed the street to avoid him, there was something in his walk that didn't ask for pity. It asked for respect. He didn't talk to anyone, just mumbled softly to himself. Check exits, scan threats, maintain awareness. Mantras from a life most of us will never know. A life filled with deserts, silence, and survival. Ahead, the Red Rail Diner cast a warm orange glow onto the snowy sidewalk. Eli paused, brushing snow from his sleeves, straightening his back like a man reporting for duty. He hadn't been inside a real building in 3 days, but tonight he had a little money, a little dignity, and one small wish to sit down and eat in peace. He would never finish that meal. The bell above the door gave a soft chime as Eli stepped into the Red Rail Diner. It was nothing fancy, just a small-town place with checkered floors, tired booths, and a coffee pot that never seemed to run dry. But to Eli that night, it felt like stepping into a different world. Warmth, light, the scent of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. It had been days since he'd felt anything close to comfort, but comfort didn't welcome him. Not here. The moment he crossed the threshold, conversation stopped mid-sentence. Eyes turned. Forks froze halfway to mouths. A mother pulled her child closer. An old man slid his wallet deeper into his coat pocket. And just like that, Eli became invisible again, not the way children playing pretend disappear, but the way society erases what it no longer wants to acknowledge. He didn't blame them. Not really. He'd seen this look before. Too many times. In subway cars. On park benches. Even in hospital waiting rooms. To them, he wasn't a man. He was a warning sign. A statistic in boots. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't see beneath the frayed jacket and tired eyes, was that Eli Turner had once led men through war zones, that he had dragged wounded soldiers from burning trucks in Kandahar, that a silver star and two purple hearts now sat tucked into an old metal tin back at the shelter collecting dust while the world kept looking the other way. They saw a homeless black man. They didn't see the warrior who had once kept their sons and daughters alive. And maybe that's the cruelest part of invisibility. Not when people forget who you are, but when they decide you never mattered in the first place. Still, Eli didn't flinch. He found a stool near the end of the counter, one with a clear view of both exits. Old habits don't fade. Not for soldiers. Just passing through, he murmured more to himself than to anyone else, looking for a hot meal. That's when Rachel, the waitress, walked over. She'd seen a lot in her 2 years at Red Rail, but something about this man made her pause. It wasn't pity, it was presence. The kind of quiet dignity that made you want to speak softer. Listen harder. Coffee, she asked. Black, he nodded. And whatever's the special today, if it's not too much trouble, ma'am. He called her ma'am. Not honey, not sweetheart, not like the regulars. With respect, like it still meant something. That's the thing, no one tells you about dignity. It's not always in the medals or uniforms. Sometimes it's in how a man holds a coffee cup with both hands, like it's the first warmth he's had in days, but he still doesn't grip it too tight, like he knows how quickly good things can be taken. From a nearby booth, 2 police officers were watching Barnes and Kyle. Regulars. They came in every Tuesday, drank their coffee, left their bitterness behind in empty cups. But tonight they brought something else: contempt. Kyle snickered loud enough for everyone to hear. Dumpster diving doesn't count as dining out, huh? Barnes chuckled. Better keep an eye on the silverware, Rachel. You know how these guys are. Laughter. Nervous glances. Silence. Eli didn't react. Didn't respond. Just took a slow sip of coffee, his eyes fixed ahead. Because when you've survived war, survived, loss, survived being forgotten, you learn how to survive humiliation too. But Rachel's hands were shaking as she brought his plate. Not from fear of Eli, no. From shame. Because deep down we all know when something is wrong. We feel it in the tightness of our chest, in the silence we wish we could fill. And on that quiet, snowy evening, in a nearly empty diner, one man's dignity stood taller than all the uniforms in the room. That's when the lesson hit, not just for Rachel, but for us watching too. Sometimes strength isn't in who shouts the loudest. It's in who stays seated, steady and still, when the world tries to shove them out the door. Rachel Miller didn't grow up thinking she'd be part of a revolution. She wasn't the kind of person who went looking for trouble or headlines or history. She just wanted to make enough to help her younger brother through the police academy, pay for community college someday, and maybe breathe a little easier by the end of each month. She was 23, a waitress, a big sister, a girl with bills in her apron pocket and dreams packed away for later. But life has a strange way of finding us, especially when we're not trying to be heroes. That night when Officer Kyle tossed a sugar packet onto Eli's plate and said, "Dance for your dinner," something inside Rachel cracked. Not broke, cracked, like glass under pressure. Just enough for the light to get in. Because she'd seen disrespect before, plenty of it, but never to a man who sat that still, that steady, that proud. Eli didn't argue, didn't flinch, didn't even look up until he needed to. And when he did, his voice was quiet but clear. "I earned my dignity in Kandahar. I don't need to earn it again from you." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a plea. It was a reminder. A reminder that he was someone, that he had bled for this country, and now all he wanted was to finish a meal in peace. But Barnes and Kyle weren't done. They boxed him in, pressured him, ordered him to leave. And when Eli refused politely, calmly, legally, they grabbed him. Rough, disrespectful, cruel. And just before they forced him out the door, Eli turned to Rachel. His eyes, tired but unblinking, found hers. And he said 5 words that would change everything. "Call General Whitaker." Pentagon. Trouble. It sounded ridiculous, unbelievable, like something from a spy movie. A homeless man invoking the Pentagon. A general, but there was something in the way he said it. Not desperation, not delusion, conviction. Rachel stood in the doorway long after the cruiser disappeared into the snow. Wind howling, her breath shaking. Then she looked down and saw something glinting beneath a dusting of white. Dog tags, military issued. Turner, Elijah J. They hadn't just arrested some vagrant. They'd arrested a veteran. A man with a name, a rank, a record. Back inside the diner, Rachel slipped into the employee bathroom and locked the door. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. She didn't know what to expect. She just knew she couldn't stay silent. "This is stupid," she whispered. "They'll think I'm crazy, or worse, I could lose my job." But still, she scrolled. Found the number. Tapped call. 3 rings. Then a crisp voice answered, "Department of Defense. How may I direct your call?" Rachel swallowed hard. I need to speak to General Whitaker. It's about Eli Turner. He's in trouble." She expected laughter, or a disconnect tone. Instead, "1 moment, please." And just like that, the wheels began to turn. By the time she spoke to General Whitaker himself, a retired general who now served as a senior advisor in Washington, Rachel's voice was steady. She told him everything. The arrest, the officers, the insults, the dog tags. And when she was done, she expected silence. Maybe a thank you. But what she heard was urgency. "You did the right thing, Miss Miller," he said. "Send me the video. Go home. Stay safe. We'll take it from here." Rachel ended the call with a mix of disbelief and adrenaline still thrumming through her fingers. She didn't know what would happen next. But she knew this. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is pick up the phone even when your voice shakes. She was just a waitress. But that night she became something more. A witness, a whistleblower, a spark. General Harold Whitaker was in the middle of reviewing briefing notes when the call came in. The kind of notes that fill Washington conference rooms long gray and heavy with statistics. But the moment he heard the name Eli Turner, the numbers disappeared. So did the years. Suddenly, he wasn't sitting in a wood-paneled office. He was back in Kandahar, heat rising in shimmering waves off the dirt roads, dust clinging to every breath, gunfire cracking through the air like lightning without warning. He could still feel the weight of the Humvee pressing down on his broken leg, still see the smoke, the fire, the chaos, still hear the voice that cut through it all. "I've got you, sir." No man left behind. It was Eli. Barely 28 then, bleeding from his shoulder streaked with grime and ash, but focused, steady, unshakable. He'd refused to leave Whitaker behind even when the odds were impossible, even when the radio went dead and the backup didn't come, even when the air support was delayed and enemy fire rained from the rooftops. Eli had dragged him, carried him, fought for him. And when it was over, when the dust settled and the birds finally returned to the sky, Whitaker had owed his life to a man whose name wasn't in any headline. But Whitaker never forgot, and he never stopped watching from afar. After the war, their paths diverged as they so often do. Whitaker climbed the ranks, served in high-level command, retired with medals and ceremonies. Eli came home to silence, to bills he couldn't pay, to a system that had space for soldiers in wartime, but little left for them afterward. The VA lost paperwork. His wife, Sarah, passed from cancer after critical delays in treatment. The bank reclaimed his home, and slowly, without fanfare or headlines, he became another shadow on the sidewalk. It haunted Whitaker, not just because Eli had saved his life, but because he knew there were thousands of Elis out there. Brave, honorable, broken, not by battle, but by neglect. That's why when Rachel called Whitaker didn't hesitate. "It's about Eli Turner," she'd said. And Whitaker had stood up from his chair before she even finished the sentence. In the next 10 minutes, he made 5 calls. To Internal Affairs, to the Secretary of Defense, to an old friend at the Department of Veterans Affairs, to Justice, and finally to a direct action unit under federal authority. "Get to Riverbrook," he ordered. "Get my man out." Because while some debts are formal, others live deeper in the marrow. Eli Turner wasn't just a veteran, he was his soldier, his brother in arms, and no man gets left behind, not on Whitaker's watch. It's easy to think of heroes as something that happens over there in deserts and uniforms and war zones. But what this story reminds us is, sometimes the battlefield follows you home, and the fight to protect what's right never really ends. For General Whitaker, this wasn't just an act of loyalty, it was a reckoning, a second chance to stand for the kind of justice he once believed he fought for overseas. And as he stared out the window of his office that night, watching the city lights blink in the distance, he knew the mission wasn't over. Not until Eli Turner was free. When Eli Turner was released from that cold Riverbrook holding cell, he didn't ask for revenge. He asked for a phone, not a lawyer, not a headline. Just a simple landline at a corner gas station, because some habits, especially from a soldier's life, never change. Cell phones could be tracked. Landlines gave you silence, control, a clean line to the people who still mattered. He dialed a number from memory. It rang once, then again, then Q's Tech Haven. "We fix what others can't. How can I help?" Eli didn't waste time. "The Eagle needs new talents." There was a pause. Then the voice changed, softened. Is that really you?" Quincy Q. Morales hadn't seen Eli in years. But there are some names and some debts you don't forget. Eli had once carried Q 3 miles to safety in the burning heat of Kandahar, both legs gone, blood soaking the dust. Now Q didn't walk, but he built things, tracked things, exposed things. He ran a legitimate tech shop during the day, but at night, Q and his crew were something more. A ghost network, built of veterans, coders, and quiet patriots. A team that didn't wait for headlines to act. They hunted corruption, silently, strategically, off the grid but never off mission. When Q arrived in Riverbrook 6 hours later, his van looked like any other tech service vehicle. But inside it was a mobile command center. Screens, encrypted servers, thermal drones, and gear that would make a federal agency sweat. With him came a small team. Marcus Ghost Wilson, former military intelligence analyst, now digital forensics expert. Perom, Brianna Trace Hamilton, ex-military police, brilliant in counterintelligence. Jordan Link Peterson, cybersecurity prodigy turned whistleblower. They didn't ask Eli for explanations. They saw the look in his eyes, and that was enough. Within hours, the motel room became a nerve center. Q handed everyone encrypted phones. No social apps, no tracking, only secure lines. We don't play their game, Q explained. We write our own rules, and we play to win. They began intercepting police radio chatter, cross-referencing officer logs, tapping into traffic cameras and body cam archives. It was Trace who found the first clue, a series of quietly encrypted payments to officers Barnes Kyle and to Captain Brick himself. The source, a private defense contractor, Falcon Corps. Each month, thousands of dollars flowed from Falcon's shell companies to these officers' bonuses, disguised as community safety stipends. But it didn't stop there. Ghost unearthed real estate documents. Falcon's subsidiaries were buying up Riverbrook's rundown neighborhoods, places where most of the town's homeless veterans lived. And once those neighborhoods were cleaned up, condos appeared, luxury cafes, office parks. They're not just getting rid of people, Eli said, his voice low. They're flipping neighborhoods, gentrifying by force. Link traced IP addresses, server trails, and backdoor logins until a digital map lit up across the screen. Multiple towns, multiple departments, a network of shield men embedded across counties. This wasn't just Riverbrook. This was a machine. And for years it had been running unchecked. And now, for the first time, someone was watching back. They didn't break any laws, but they did what the law refused to do. They found the truth. They preserved the proof. They built a case no one could ignore. Eli would watch them work quietly, respectfully. He knew what it was like to trust someone with your life. Now it was his life's truth they were protecting. And in between scanning radio waves and decoding emails, Q would sometimes glance at Eli and say, "Still getting into trouble, I see." And Eli would smile, just barely. "Still pulling me out, I hope." Yeah, because justice doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it rolls up in a van wearing a Batman t-shirt and carrying a laptop. And that's the lesson the world often forgets. Real power doesn't shout, it listens, it learns. And when the time is right, it acts. Most people think of the law as a shield, something designed to protect, to serve, to stand between the innocent and the unjust. But what happens when that shield is turned around? What if the very people sworn to uphold the law begin to use it as a tool of silence, of fear, of control? That was the story unraveling in Riverbrook. As Q's team dug deeper, the pieces began to fit together. Not scattered corruption, not a few bad apples, but a system, a quiet network embedded within the police department. They called themselves the Shieldmen, and they didn't wear different uniforms. They didn't have patches or secret salutes. Just a shared understanding: we protect each other. We protect the mission. And no one, not a judge, not a citizen, not a camera, gets in the way. Trace was the first to confirm the internal communications, heavily encrypted, labeled as off-the-book briefings. The Shieldmen had their own language, their own codes. They rated officers not by arrests, but by clearance efficiency, a euphemism for how many undesirables they removed from town. Kyle and Barnes weren't just rogue cops. They were high performers. And Captain Brick, he wasn't just aware. He was their architect. He trained new cadets using Shieldmen doctrine. Unofficial sessions, unrecorded, where the message was simple: keep the streets clean, make the paperwork match, and remember who signs your paycheck. Rachel's brother Jameson, still a police academy cadet, secretly recorded one such session. The audio was chilling. Captain Brick's voice calm and collected. "You see a vagrant outside a school that's not a citizen, it's a threat. You rough him up, you charge him, or you relocate him. We're not here to serve sympathy. We're here to protect stability." In that moment, the badge wasn't a symbol of service. It was a license. To remove, to intimidate, to erase. And all of it came with reward. Each successful clearance earned payouts from Falcon Corps. Bonuses processed through dummy nonprofits and shell vendors. Eli sat in silence as they reviewed the evidence. He'd seen war. He'd seen betrayal. But this was different. They turned my oath inside out, he said quietly. They took everything we stood for and used it to crush the very people we swore to protect. Because the Shieldmen didn't go after criminals. They went after those who couldn't fight back. People with no homes, no families, no lawyers, people like Eli. And the worst part, they did it legally, with paperwork, with carefully worded reports, with edited footage and signed-off use of force justifications. They didn't break the law. They bent it, quietly, systematically, over and over. That's what made them so dangerous. Because when evil wears a mask, we know how to fight it. But when injustice wears a badge, people look away. That's the truth Rachel struggled with. She'd grown up believing the police were the good guys. Her brother still believed that. So did most of the town. And in many places they are. But in Riverbrook, a line had been crossed. And the law was no longer a shield. It was a sword. A lesson began to emerge, one both painful and necessary. Authority without accountability becomes tyranny in slow motion. And while it starts with the most vulnerable, it never ends there. If you really want to understand how injustice spreads, don't just look at who holds the gun. Look at who's paying for the bullets. Q had seen it before, in war zones, in politics, in corporate boardrooms, and now in Riverbrook. As Ghost and Link dug deeper into encrypted files and payment trails, a name kept appearing quietly but consistently: Falcon Corps. Officially, they were a defense contractor, the kind that builds armored vehicles, surveillance drones, and public safety tools for law enforcement. Unofficially, they were a machine for monetizing fear. Q traced the flow of money from Falcon Corps to a web of shell companies, to local PACs, to community development nonprofits, and finally, to officers' bank accounts, real estate purchases, and private accounts marked consulting stipends. But the money wasn't just paying off cops, it was reshaping the town. Ghost overlaid real estate data onto a town map, and suddenly the truth stared back at them. Entire blocks once filled with public housing, modest rentals, old family homes had been bought out. Quietly, cheaply, mostly through subsidiaries with bland names like Urban Vision or Brookfield Assets. They weren't just targeting the homeless, they were removing them, so the land underneath could be flipped, so revitalization could happen without any messy reminders of poverty. Q highlighted one email in particular, sent from a Falcon Corps executive to a Shieldman liaison. All removals must be complete by Q3. We have investors lined up. No visible vagrancy near Phase 2 developments. To them, it wasn't about crime. It wasn't about safety. It was about optics. Because high-end condos don't sell well when there's a veteran with a shopping cart outside. Rachel looked at the screen in disbelief. She'd lived in Riverbrook her whole life. She'd watched the coffee shops move in, the yoga studios, the bike lanes, the no loitering signs that popped up where bus stops used to be. But she'd never connected the dots. Now it was undeniable. They're building a new version of this town, she whispered. One where people like Eli don't exist. And that's the truth too many towns face, not just Riverbrook. It's not that people are displaced. It's that someone profits when they disappear. Because gentrification isn't just about paint and brick. It's about who gets to stay and who gets quietly pushed out when they no longer fit the brochure. Falcon Corps had found a formula. Step 1, partner with police. Step 2, label poverty as danger. Step 3, clear out the problem. Step 4, rebrand the neighborhood. Step 5, sell it back to the world as progress. And it worked until someone like Eli sat down at a diner, until someone like Rachel hit record, until someone like Q followed the money. Because if injustice hides in shadows, money always leaves a trail. Injustice rarely walks in through the front door. It buys its way in quietly, one parcel at a time. And by the time most people realize what's happening, the soul of their town is already gone. At first, Rachel didn't think anyone would notice. She had posted the video with shaking hands and a knot in her stomach. Eli's story, the diner confrontation, the truth captured in quiet clarity without edits or spin. She thought maybe a few people in town would see it. Maybe some would care. By morning, it had over 1 million views. Veterans groups shared it. Civil rights attorneys reposted it. National news anchors picked it up mid-segment, interrupting headlines to say you need to watch this. And suddenly, Rachel Miller, the waitress who once wondered if calling the Pentagon was a mistake, was being called a hero. But heroes, as she would soon learn, make powerful enemies. The threats came quickly. Anonymous messages, fake reviews calling her un-American, photos of her apartment posted on local forums. One morning, someone threw a brick through her window. The note attached read, "Cop haters get what they deserve." Then her job at the diner disappeared. Too much attention, the owner told her. You're scaring away regulars. Rachel had stood up for someone, and now she was being erased too. It's a pattern older than justice itself. When you speak truth to power, power pushes back. Not in dramatic ways at first, but in small cutting ones. A missed paycheck, a sideways glance, a silence that fills rooms that once felt familiar. But Rachel wasn't the only one they targeted. Ava, still gathering testimony, still building the case, nearly died when a truck swerved toward her car one night. It missed her by inches. The look in the driver's eyes told her everything. This was no accident. And then came the raid. Q's entire command center hacked, tracked, and raided under the guise of suspicious cyber activity. His wheelchair flipped, his arm fractured. Laptops seized, evidence taken. The team scattered into backup locations, their encrypted servers, thankfully one step ahead. But the message was clear. We know what you're doing, and we want it to stop. Then, they came for Rachel again, in broad daylight. As she walked down Main Street to get sandwiches for the team, a cruiser pulled up. Barnes and Kyle stepped out calm and practiced. Rachel Miller, you're under arrest for interfering with police business and tampering with evidence. She barely had time to protest. Someone captured the moment on a nearby traffic cam, Rachel being shoved into the back seat as she shouted, "I have rights." Inside her shoe tucked in tight was a recording device still running. And back at the motel, when Eli saw the footage come through Q's hacked feed, something inside him changed. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't panic. He just stood up and said, "We're going to get her back. No weapons, no violence, just a plan." And a team of veterans who had seen war and remembered what honor really looked like. The warehouse was old, forgotten, just like the people the Shieldmen had taken there before. But tonight it wouldn't be forgotten. With drones in the sky, thermal imaging on the ground, and encrypted radios humming in their ears, Eli led the rescue. They moved like ghosts, quiet, focused. Each step a reminder, we don't leave our own behind. Inside, Rachel sat tied to a chair, a bruise on her cheek, eyes wide but unbroken. Officer Barnes sat just feet away, smug and unbothered, until the door opened, and Eli stepped through. What happened next wasn't flashy. It wasn't even violent. Eli disarmed Barnes with one swift, controlled motion, just like he'd been trained. No rage, just resolve. Because this wasn't about payback. It was about bringing someone home. Rachel smiled through her tears as he untied her. "They wanted to scare me," she whispered. "But I never stopped recording." And in that moment, surrounded by shadows and silence, and the ghosts of what could have been, Rachel Miller wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a witness, a fighter, a voice no longer afraid. And here's the truth. Sometimes standing up makes you a target, but it also makes you a beacon. Because when you refuse to be silenced, you give others permission to speak. It started with a hand that didn't tremble, even though her heart did. Rachel had no production crew, no press training, just a phone, and a decision. She could have deleted the video. She could have convinced herself it wouldn't matter, that no one would believe a waitress over two armed officers. But something about Eli Turner's eyes, steady, tired, but full of dignity, had etched itself into her conscience. And so one night in the quiet of her apartment, she uploaded the video. No captions, no commentary. Just the raw, unflinching footage of what happened in the Red Rail Diner. Within hours, it caught fire. Not the viral kind filled with memes or drama, but the kind that burns through silence, through comfort, through the belief that this doesn't happen in my town. The internet watched Eli Turner get mocked, cornered, and arrested, watched him sit still while the badge meant to protect him became a weapon. watched him hold his ground with the calm of a man who'd survived worse. And suddenly everyone had something to say. Veteran organizations reposted the footage. Civil rights attorneys called for investigation. News anchors interrupted their broadcast to air it live. Justice for Eli started trending, then climbed, then exploded. But more than the numbers, it was the stories that came in, messages from across the country. My dad was a homeless vet. He died in a parking lot last winter. No one ever cared. Until now. I'm a former officer. I saw this happen more than once. I didn't know how to speak up until now. I thought I was the only one who noticed. Thank you for proving I wasn't crazy or alone. Meanwhile, Q's team turned Rachel's video into something more. They added documents, voice recordings, testimonies. They didn't dramatize it. They just told the truth and let the truth speak for itself. And it did. Loudly. What began as a single video became a series of mini-documentaries, each one focused on a veteran. Each one human. Each one undeniable. A man who lost both legs in Iraq, now sleeping under a freeway. A woman who served as a medic, now denied treatment herself. A father of two arrested not for crime, but for being seen. These weren't statistics. They were neighbors, forgotten heroes, and one by one the country began to see them again. And that's the power of a camera in the right hands. Not to provoke outrage for outrage's sake, but to illuminate, to bear witness, to say this happened, and now you know. Because injustice thrives in the shadows, but visibility is a spark. And once it's lit, there's no going back to darkness. You don't need a stage or a spotlight to make change. Just enough courage to keep filming when the world wants you to look away. Eli Turner never planned to stand before Congress. He was a soldier, not a speaker. His words had always been sharper when whispered in war rooms, not echoed in marble halls. But when the invitation came an official request to testify before a joint congressional committee on veteran homelessness and systemic abuse of authority, he didn't hesitate. Not because he wanted the spotlight, but because too many others no longer could speak for themselves. So he showed up, not in uniform, not in some polished politician's suit, but in a simple dark blazer, a white shirt, and the weight of memory on his shoulders. He stood behind the microphone, took a quiet breath, and began. My name is Elijah Turner. I served 3 tours in Afghanistan. I received 2 Purple Hearts and a Silver Star. And when I came home, I lost everything. He told them about Sarah, his wife, the VA delays, the paperwork, the cancer, the loss. He spoke of eviction, of sleeping in his car, then in shelters, of hearing the word hero from strangers one week and being called trash the next. And then he told them about Riverbrook, about the diner, the arrest, the silence of the room, and the sound of his dignity almost being stripped away until someone made a call. As he spoke, the room stayed silent. Legislators leaned forward. Cameras zoomed in. Journalists stopped typing, just listened. Because this wasn't a soundbite. It wasn't a headline. It was a man standing not for himself, but for every veteran who'd been pushed aside. For every family who'd buried someone lost not to battle but to bureaucracy. And for every citizen who still believed the law could be better than the people abusing it. He ended with this: we say no man left behind. But the truth is we've left thousands, not on foreign soil, but on our own sidewalks. And if telling the truth makes me a target, then I accept it. Because if one more vet gets seen, if one more Rachel finds the courage to act, then it was worth it. The room erupted in applause. Not polite, not political, but full human, honest applause. Even the most skeptical lawmakers stood. Even the ones who'd planned to slip out early stayed rooted to their chairs. Because sometimes one voice doesn't just speak, it awakens something. By that afternoon, headlines read, Veterans' Testimony Moves Congress to Action. Turner's words may change how we treat our own. Not all wars end at the border. Emergency legislation was drafted. Funding for veteran housing, independent investigations into use of force complaints, federal protection for whistleblowers within police departments. It didn't fix everything, but it started something. Something loud, something clear, something impossible to ignore. We often think big change needs big power, but sometimes it just takes someone standing tall in their truth and refusing to sit down. At first, Riverbrook didn't know how to react. Some denied, some deflected. Some insisted that what happened to Eli Turner was just a misunderstanding. But the truth has a way of echoing, especially when it's been ignored for too long. And in the weeks after Eli's testimony before Congress, something surprising happened. Riverbrook didn't just feel ashamed, it began to change. It started with the diner. The red rail, the very place where Eli had been humiliated, was sold to a new owner. Not a franchise, not a big name, just a local couple who wanted to make things right. They renovated it, warmed it up, added a plaque near the counter where Eli once sat. It read, "Dignity lives here." Rachel was offered her job back. She declined, because by then she was busy co-founding something else, a nonprofit cafe called Second Watch, where all staff were either homeless veterans, survivors of displacement, or at-risk youth. They served good food, hot coffee, and every customer knew this place was built on second chances. Next came the town council. Spurred by national pressure and local protests, they passed a resolution creating an independent oversight board for the police department, diverting part of the town budget into transitional housing, and most radically transforming an old textile factory into the Turner Veterans Community Center. Eli never asked for his name to be on the building. In fact, he protested it. But when the vote passed unanimously, veterans, neighbors, former skeptics, he quietly accepted. And when the ribbon was cut 6 months later, he stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, watching as kids ran through the doors. Inside were counseling offices, job training labs, beds with clean sheets, a garden in the back where vegetables grew beside American flags. Q's team set up a small office upstairs offering tech workshops for vets interested in cybersecurity or coding. Doc Holloway, Eli's old squad medic, ran a PTSD support group twice a week, and sometimes on warm afternoons, you could find Eli out back tending the garden sleeves, rolled up dog tags resting quietly against his chest. Redemption isn't loud. It doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in choices, small ones, quiet ones, repeated ones. Riverbrook didn't erase its past. It owned it, faced it, and rebuilt something better from its ruins. And maybe that's the real miracle of this story. Not that a town was exposed, but that it chose to heal. Because every community faces a moment like Riverbrook did. A moment where it must ask, will we protect what's easy, or will we defend what's right? Shame doesn't have to be the end. Sometimes it's just the beginning of courage, of accountability, of transformation. In the final chapter, The Man Who Wouldn't Bow and What Came After a Quiet Life, a national legacy, and a truth that still calls to us today. A year after everything, Eli Turner walked the streets of Riverbrook in quiet anonymity. No cameras, no reporters. Just a man with steady steps and a deeper kind of peace. He still lived simply just a modest home near the community center. He still carried the names of the fallen in a wooden box by his window. Still visited the garden each morning. Still paused at the wall inside the center, where Malik Johnson's photo hung beside dozens of others. But something had changed. He was no longer invisible. Children waved to him. Veterans shook his hand. Even strangers called him by name, not out of fame, but out of respect. One afternoon, a teenager approached him outside the cafe. Shy, shoulders hunched, a look Eli knew too well. "Do you think someone like me can make a difference?" the boy asked. Eli looked him in the eye. "You already have. You just haven't seen the ripple yet." And maybe that's the real legacy of this story. Not just what was exposed, but what was rebuilt. Not just the fire that revealed the rot, but the light that helped others see more clearly. Because when one man refuses to bow, others stand up straighter. When one voice speaks truth, others find their own. When one act of courage is witnessed, thousands are inspired. So now we turn to you. What would you do if you saw someone being silenced? Would you look away or press record? Would you stay silent or make the call? Because somewhere right now, someone like Eli is sitting quietly at a diner and wondering if anyone will stand up. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Hit subscribe to hear more real stories of everyday courage. Click like If you believe dignity belongs to everyone, no matter their title, their status, or their past. And most importantly, share this video. Let it be the one that helps someone speak up, or someone finally be heard. Because justice begins with a story, and maybe that story begins with you.